From the land to Grant University in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, this is the Closing Market Report. It is the 24th day of January 2025. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason. Coming up, we'll talk about the commodity markets with Mike Zuzolo at globalcomresearch.com, and Eric Snodgrass from Conduit.Ag will join us along the way. I'll bring you up to speed on crop budgets for 2025, the coming growing season, from the farmdoc team, and we'll hear from Secretary of Ag Nominee Rollins on this Friday edition of the Closing Market Report from Illinois Public Media. It's public radio for the farming world.
Todd Gleason services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
March corn for the day settled at $4.86.5, down 3 1/4 cents. The May at $4.96.5, 2 3/4 lower. New crop December at $4.61, down 3 1/4. March soybeans today $10.55 3/4, 9 3/4 lower. The May down 9 1/2 at $10.68 1/4, and new crop November at $10.48 3/4, 4 1/2 cents lower. Bean meal off $10.40. The bean oil up 18 cents. Soft red winter wheat down a dime, settled at $5.44. The hard red at $5.59 1/2, down 11 1/4 cents. Live cattle futures at $2.03, 2 1/2, up $2.30. Feeders up $2.50 at $2.7657 1/2, and lean hogs for 100 pounds up $1 at $88.20. The Closing Market Report is celebrating 40 years, some 10,000 episodes, and 30,000 interviews. Mike Zuzolo now joins us from globalcomresearch.com. He's in Atchison, Kansas. Hey, Mike, do you still have snow on the ground where you are?
You know, we do, Todd. It's been extremely cold after the 14 to 15 inches we got, a couple, 3 weeks ago, and just haven't seen much snow melt. We're looking at a warming trend next week. The weather models are a little bit in disagreement. They turned a little bit wetter for the hard red wheat belt, and that actually probably played a bit into Friday's price action with hard red wheat, soft red wheat, and meal, the leaders to the downside after starting the week out as the leaders to the upside. So it's going to be a pretty important weather week next week, as a lot of meteorologists I talk to and follow suggest that there may be a pattern change coming. So we need the precip, that's for sure. And I would include Nebraska and South Dakota corn belt and wheat belt farmers in that too.
We're almost to that time of year where the weather does change a little later normally in March, but we'll see what brings from the weather in the next week or so. What do you make of this 4-day trading week for corn and soybeans?
So much to digest that the market is still probably trying to sift through everything, but I've got 3 major points. President Trump's trade policy and his foreign policy are essentially one and the same. And we've talked about this, and that just has, I think, been stamped as far as he's doing it now, whether he's talking to OPEC to cut the price of oil, whether he's talking about cutting interest rates, whether he goes on an interview and says that he doesn't want to have to put tariffs on China. That last one in particular, Todd, I think really rang a bell with the grain trade and the dollar and the currency markets on Friday. It seemed that really moved those markets and helped underpin the corn and the soybeans. And they found some support, I think, from that and derived through the U.S. dollar weakening against some of those key currencies like the Chinese currency and the Brazilian currency. I think point number 2 is, as I said, meal and wheat led the market higher to start the week. They led the market lower to end the week. This is, I think, a cautionary, kind of a yellow flag. We see that on the weekly closes. The market looked tired this week. Corn closed roughly 2 cents, penny and a half higher than it did the prior week. Wheat barely closed positive. Soybeans closed, better versus the other two, but it just looks more tired. And I think this goes to the Argentine export tax being cut. I think that really impacted negatively the wheat and the meal prices, and and also I think some weather improvement in Argentina probably didn't help either.
We have talked about that just a bit, but to go back and go through it, essentially the Argentine farmers in something of the same situation, of course, as U.S. farmers, looking at losses, complained about the export tax that gets put onto their product and hoping to garner more of that for themselves. So the Argentine president, Milei, cut, I think, does it start now? Is that, I don't quite recall when, but down to 26% from what, 33%, I think, for their export tax?
Yeah, it was almost a double-digit cut, and it does, I believe, start first of next week. And Milei also needs the U.S. dollars, and if you look at Argentina, that's about the only way they can generate dollars on their own is to get agriculture exports out the door. The big question is, do farmers take the bait? Do they sell? And I'm hearing that they have a pretty ample amount of old crop corn and beans, and that may get the trigger pulled for them to sell some of that old crop. So I think next week, for me, South America carries as much weight as it did this week in that we see what the Argentine farmer does and whether that pulls the Argentine corn and bean prices down, which they've been steadily increasing in prices, upriver export prices. The second thing is I think we're really building a situation, and this probably is why the beans and corn were able to hold up a little bit better than the wheat as well, is a lot more analysts and a lot more people in the trade talking supply demand are much more worried about center west Brazil not getting beans harvested and the second crop corn planted. I think that was at the top of the list as we closed out the week. And so I have to watch that weather pattern in center west Brazil. That's going to be the biggie when it comes to the whether the corn market can keep going or not to the upside on the supply side, if you ask me.
Yeah, so things that are happening are soybeans potentially coming out of Argentina, putting pressure on the marketplace. The weather in Argentina looks better, I believe, so that putting pressure on the marketplace. However, for the corn market, it is about how fast harvest goes in Mato Grosso at this time.
Yeah, it is. And I think the other thing that I would say disappointed me this week, and I'm going to give it a chance next week, is the phytosanitary issue of Brazilian beans to China. It looked like that was a real contamination issue. So is China going to be back in for a lot of beans from the United States, especially given the pullback? But that and the weakening of the dollar against the Brazilian currency, I would have expected a little bit more upside move in the soy complex as we closed out the week. But again, that meal market continues to be the real thorn in the soy complex side.
Did you confirm what they believe that was? I heard possibly a desiccant, which would be a way to kill the beans earlier.
That is what I am hearing, but no confirmation on that.
Yeah, none for me either. So just a rumor. We'll see how that goes. 5 cargoes, and we'll have to see what China and the Brazilians do over time. What's your bottom line for the end of this week?
Bottom line for me is we are vulnerable to a bigger setback if we don't have several boxes get checked that we talked about next week. The charts are suggesting that as well. Corn could be more of the leader to the downside. I still feel as though wheat weather, both here and in the Baltic areas, is underappreciated, and therefore the prices are underpriced at this stage. And I can't go away without saying another new record high in the live cattle to close the week out. HPAI seems to be expanding. APHIS moved on more curtailing of the border in Canada, and I'm hearing more outbreaks here in this country as well. So protein supplies are going down. Very important to watch cattle on feed and the big annual, semi-annual numbers, which ain't really annual numbers because we didn't get a July report next week on cattle.
Thank you much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd.
That is Mike Zuzolo. He's with GlobalComResearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas. Earlier in the week, we went through the updated farmdoc crop budgets for corn and soybeans. For the coming growing season, the University of Illinois budget cash prices changed by 5 cents for both of those crops. Corn went up 5 cents to $4.30 a bushel, and soybeans came down to $10.20. Those are the new crop projections. The same farmdoc update included new figures and information for the old crop, too. And what Nick Paulson calls some good news, we'll qualify that in a moment. The 2024 season cash prices were increased 15 cents per corn to $4.25. And again, the soybean price was lowered. It dropped 30 cents to $10.20. Now, the old crop budget projections were also updated to include estimates of the economic assistance payments included in the American Relief Act signed by President Biden. Those are expected to add around $43 per acre for corn and $30 per acre for soybeans. and are intended to help offset some of the losses associated with the 2024 crop year, says Paulson.
While the economic assistance payments provide welcome financial relief in the short term, keep in mind that these payments will not address the ongoing issue of production costs being misaligned with current market prices. In summary, while projections for both 2024 and 2025 have improved compared with where we stood in September, average returns for producers on cash-rented farmland are expected to remain negative. Producers should remain diligent in trying to identify ways to lower production costs and manage their risk during this multi-year period of extremely tight and challenging margins.
During our annual All-Day Ag Outlook at the Beef House coming up in March, the FarmDoc team, including Nick Paulson, Gary Schnittke, and Joe Jansen, will address these challenges and ways to manage the risk. Watch for registration information next week on our website at willag.org. Now, in related news, President Trump's USDA pick for Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, during her Senate confirmation hearing, suggested more farm payments may be the administration's answer to another trade war. Rollins agreed with the senators that farmers want trade, not aid, but if President Trump's tariffs lead to more trade wars, there could be more MFP, or market facilitation, payments.
We are prepared to execute something similar if approved, if confirmed, but also working with the White House to ensure that we can close those holes for our farmers and ranchers.
Close the short-term trade losses, yes, but maybe not completely recover the long-term implications. U.S. soybean exports to China have yet to return to the pre-2018 levels, when about 60% of that nation's needs came from the United States. It dropped to 18% during the trade war and has been in the mid to low 50s since about 2020. Those are figures Joanna Calusi from the U of I posted to the FarmDoc Daily website this week. So the checks in the mail is the short-term answer, and on that note, the Secretary of Ag nominee, Rollins, said distributing the American Relief Act, or ARA, funds will be a priority. Again, that legislation was passed and signed in late December, with hopes the funds would be distributed by the end of March. Let's turn our attention now to the weather forecast. Eric Snodgrass is here from Conduit.Ag at Conduit.Ag online. Hey, thanks, Eric, for taking some time with me. I think we have a lot of ground to cover today. We always do. This week, however, it includes more because I want to know what you thought about those historic snowstorms along the coastal areas of the United States, from Houston to Florida.
Well, Todd, this is what it reminded me of, first of all. Back in 1984, all right, so I'm 4 years old. I have a picture in my parents' backyard where I'm next to a drift that's like 10 feet, right? I mean, this is a monstrous drift in my parents' backyard. And so my child is forever shaped by that. I used to think, man, we used to get feet of snow. And so it's just kind of funny to think back to that time. Well, you're going to have a whole generation of people who remember the blizzard of 25, right? First time ever for the National Weather Service out of Louisiana to issue a blizzard along the coast. We had snow on the coast. I mean, in the Gulf of Mexico, stretched from southern Texas all the way to North Carolina and everywhere in between. Florida set a record. There's a foot of snow in New Orleans. And so it's going to be one of those kind of lifetime weather events. Now, this is what I'm thinking about, though, Todd. What did we talk about the week before that? We talked about the wildfires in Southern California, which we continue to have this week, plus in the Baja of California. And honestly, it's all symptomatic of the same thing. So do you know the only way you can get snow that far to the south is you've got to start cold air clear from the Arctic and take it into the Gulf. Did you know that low never even touched, North America? It went through the Gulf of Mexico and just missed us. And by the way, it eventually went into the North Atlantic, the same snowstorm, all right, went into the North Atlantic and hit Ireland yesterday with 115 mile an hour winds.
Oh, wow.
Now it's crazy. This is all symptomatic of the same thing. And I don't know how many people listening right now remember what I said last Friday, but I talked about how we have this one-dimensional jet stream pattern, right? We do not have this double component hitting us from both sides, ripping across the United States. So how do you get cold air all the way down to the Gulf Coast? You can't have the jet living over it. You got to be able to sink that cold air in place. And this is all symptomatic of the bigger problem, which is what's promoted such dry conditions across so many areas in the United States. And to be honest, what we should be talking about is not where the snow fell, but where the snow isn't. The snow isn't on the headwaters of the Mississippi or the Missouri River. And that continues to be just something that if we don't flip this thing around, I'll be talking about drought issues for the rest of 2025. So yeah, history was made, but I'm also looking at the areas that have gotten nothing and what it means to understand where these drought areas are starting to pick up some pace. And that's what I'm concerned about going into this new month of February.
I'm usually asking about snowpack in the mountains, not what snow conditions are like in Minnesota. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Will there be snow as in the future weeks here? They're still in the month of January, just about to hit February. It'll stay cold.
That's right. We're not anywhere close to being done with winter. I do have some good news for you. The temperatures are going to moderate. I mean, it has been bone-chillingly cold several mornings in a row around here. In fact, Todd, something to think about. Parts of Kansas, which do not have snow cover on. There's a bunch around Kansas City, but not the whole state. Remember, earlier this week, they took on temperatures that were in the -10 to -15 range. And we're curious. In fact, I was talking to Arlen Suderman about it. We're just curious if maybe there was some kill that we won't know until we get into April. Now, it takes a lot to kill wheat in the middle of winter, but it can happen if you don't have the snowpack. All right, so you say, well, what's going on this last week of January, the beginning of February? I'm just hoping that we can rearrange the jet stream. There are several things making it happen, but bring a trough back to the West Coast. I mean, do you know that during all of this, we've not mentioned at all what's going on the West Coast? Just no good flow. If we could get that to return, we could start to wake things up, pull some Gulf moisture here, get a little bit more mild air, and fill in some of these holes that have been missed out with some snow. And I think that could be an interesting thing that February does. I think February is going to go down as one where the northern half of the country sees a pretty active storm track. So we talked in January about snow down south. I think February is going to be snow back in our area if the flow pattern returns the way we're hoping it will by the beginning of the new month.
Well, it might stay into the month of March. I know you can't make the all-day outlook because you'll be in Denver at the Commodity Classic.
Yeah.
Actually, several of the folks that normally would be with us won't be there, but we have a great lineup still there. And I have to admit, there are years I don't think we've ever canceled from weather since 1991, if I recall correctly. I'm not quite certain about that, but man, we have needed four-wheel drives to get there and back from time to time. Does what you've talked about have any impact on your summertime thoughts?
Yeah. And that's ultimately the question, right? So here's the idea. Now, understand, Todd, I am more than prepared to be wrong on this. And I am not saying this to be any sort of alarmist, all right? But there is concern that if you're east of the Mississippi, that we're going to have the cooler weather lasting through a bigger chunk of March. And then we think it's going to be a pretty wet March in April and maybe the beginning of May, which means tight windows. That would follow historical data that we've been studying, plus the analog years, plus every model. Right now, they're all just saying, hey, look out for a wet and stormy spring here. But that drought I kept mentioning, the one that's, in Mexico and in the Southwest and in, pockets throughout the Midwest where we still have soil moisture deficits, there's a concern that creeps from the west to the east as the summer goes on, meaning that it'll probably hit the Western Corn Belt first, become a problem along the Mississippi River mid-year. So I'm talking about July. And as it get over to us, there's a chance that could happen. So you ask, what does all this mean for later? Unless something big comes along and changes all of this, that's where this typical pattern finds itself, just kind of following the good old flow of the atmosphere without that second piece of the jet stream in winter. So there's some concern on the table, but man, there's still 4.5, 5 months before this matters. And I think until then, we will be watching to see, La Nina Fe, or if we'll see the North Pacific Jet do something different. There's all sorts of things that can change. But if it doesn't, that's what we're looking at.
The concern on the table, however, does matter in South America, particularly in Argentina. What are your assessments?
Isolated storms the last few days, modest rains in a few places. There's pockets of drought down there. Most folks I talk to say, all right, but did Brazil pick up some of the problem areas in Argentina? Possibly, but it's been so wet in northern Brazil lately Here's the forecast. They're going to flip it around a little bit. Maybe some more modest rain comes back in Argentina, southern Brazil, where there has been pockets of drought, and it gets drier in northern Brazil. Now, you understand, drier in northern Brazil means they still get 1.5 inches of rain every week. But the thing will be that they're going to be able to start harvesting a bit quicker in the next 7 to 10 days. And they're going to have to do it quickly because we all project that after we start that new month of February, it's going to get wet across the northern growing areas again, at least based off current projections. So that could be some tighter planting windows for safrinha crops once they start to go in. But at this stage, I still can't, Todd, find a major reason to tell you that Brazil's going to spark some sort of weather premium in the market right now.
Hey, thanks much, Eric.
Yeah, you bet.
Eric Snodgrass is with Conduit.Ag. That's at Conduit.Ag online. Joined us on this Friday afternoon edition of the Closing Market Report. If you can stay with us for the whole of the hour, you'll hear all of our Commodity Week program. In fact, we'll talk with a grains analyst from Argentina, and I'll give you a preview. She says good crop there. Not great crop, but good crop. I think she just means it's okay. You can listen for yourself. That's coming up next on Commodity Week.
Todd Gleason services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
Well, welcome to Commodity Week. I am Todd Gleason. A special program today pulled in part from the FarmDoc Daily webinar held on Thursday morning with Joanna Calusi from the University of Illinois talking about Brazil and Argentina and crop production there. And Paulina Lescano joined her from Argentina, where she lives in La Pampa. She's a grains analyst. You can find her online at paulinalescano.com. And then we paired that with a conversation which we had with Joe Jansen at the U of I, along with Kurt Kimmel of agmarket.net about the commodity markets in general. It's a great show. Stay with us here at Illinois Public Media. We'll pick up first with that FarmDoc webinar, which you can watch in full at youtube.com/@FarmDoc. At the end of the webinar, I asked Paulina Lescano to introduce herself. She's a grains analyst, as you might recall.
Well, yes, as you told, I am an agricultural engineer. I am grain analyst. My main work is to advise farmers to follow their commercial position, so they can decide when to sell the grain and how to cover it from the volatility. I give speeches. Companies hire me to give a talk in different countries. Even I was in United States. This is my main focus. I work in the business almost for 25 years until now. I work in a company, in an exporter, a broker, and finally, I work by my own as advisor.
That's Paulina Lescano. She is a grains analyst from Argentina and joined our Commodity Week discussion, recorded Thursday afternoon, along with panelist Kurt Kimmel from agmarket.net, Joanna Calusi, and Joe Jansen, both from the University of Illinois. Find it online in its entirety right now at willag.org, willag.org. Commodity Week is our weekly look at the marketplace. You can also hear it on many of these radio stations over the weekend. You've been listening to the Closing Market Report on this Friday afternoon. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason.